Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Elizabeth Greene, paranormal romance author, and today, as promised in last week's video, I'm going to be talking about my writing processes and comparing plotting versus pantsing. I'm also going to be continuing last week's competition, so if you would like to get your hands on a signed copy of my debut novel, Saved by the Big Bad Wolf, then all you need to do is comment below and let me know what your favourite paranormal creature is, and you will be entered in the draw. But before we get into any of that, make sure that you click that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay up to date with the latest from me. So, plotting and pantsing. I would say plotting involves a lot more organisation, a lot more structure and discipline. So a writer will already have outlined and set out what is going to happen in their story before they even start writing it. Pantsing is taken from the phrase flying by the seat of your pants, which basically means you're making it up as you go along. You're rolling with it, you're letting the story evolve organically, and you're happy to see where the story and the characters take you. Some writers are plotters, some writers are pantsers, some do a little bit of both, and there is no wrong or right way in which to do it. It very much depends on the individual writer's style and what they feel comfortable with. But let's take a closer look at these two styles and consider the pros and cons to each. So, what are the pros to plotting? Well, it helps writers be a little bit more organised. It definitely keeps you more goal focused. So rather than just focusing on the ultimate goal, which is write the book, it helps you break it down into goals that are more achievable and attainable in small chunks. So you know when you've written a chapter, tick, that one's done off the list, you're one step closer to finishing the book. Some writers find that this particularly helps with combating writer's block. Another pro is you might accomplish the task of writing the book quicker than you would otherwise. You've already done the thinking and the imagining of characters and new worlds and the story right up front, so that all you have to do is write the bloody thing. If you are using the plotting method, you are much less likely to go off on a tangent and get distracted. We're writers, we're creators, we're storytellers, we're people with very overactive imaginations, and sometimes we have about 100 or so different characters living in our minds, jostling for space, trying to get some attention. So it can be very difficult to stay on track sometimes. The distraction struggle is real, people. And for some writers, having a strict plan to stick with really helps keep Red Leader on target. But what happens if you invest all this time up front in planning out your characters, their storyline, exactly what is going to happen down to the finest detail, and you start writing the thing and it's just not working for you? And it's become far too formulaic and it's lost your interest. What do we do then? So let's look at some of the cons to plotting. Some writers find plotting to be too restrictive and believe it hinders the creative flow and writer's instincts. Some writers feel that having a really strict plot from the outset gets in the way of your book becoming more than what you first thought it might be. I'm talking, it could be there's character spin-offs, it could be there's sequels, trilogies, or even a whole saga that comes out of this one idea. By setting it out in stone early on, you lose some of that flexibility to make further stories down the line work with the original story. Some writers find that plotting takes all the fun out of the process, and there's too much emphasis on the planning stages, which means you end up with a story that's a little too formulaic and has lost all its vibrancy. So what does pantsing have to offer? One of the main pros of pantsing is that you have complete free reign over your creativity. You can write down whatever the hell you want and nobody's going to tell you it's right or wrong. You start off with a warlock who has fire powers, but what if he also learned that he could control water, but he only even knew this was possible because he had to save a random human? And the only way he could do that is because he had hold of some kind of stolen ancient artifact that used to belong to a dragon, but he didn't know it was stolen. So now this warlock is on the run with this random human and they fall in love, only for them to find that she's not actually human, but you get the idea. Funsies. You can flex your story as it evolves. There is the option to write sequels and make as many changes as you like as you go along. You can write in any order. Some authors don't like to start writing at the beginning. Some have the ending in mind and that's where they work, and they kind of write the story backwards. Some writers have a scene in their head that they need to get down on paper, and then everything else just kind of grows out from that one moment. Sounds great, right? Not always. So let's look at some of the cons. We may have hinted to some of these when we talked about plotting, but let's take a look at them again. Your story can easily lose focus. If you're writing a story that even you don't know where it's going, you could end up with a messy storyline, characters whose personalities and arc changes chapter to chapter, and you could end up giving your readers whiplash. We don't want to do that to our readers. We love our readers. So picture the scene. You're talking to a friend, or even possibly even a writing agent or a publisher. And they ask you, so what's the story about? What do you say? Well, it's about a boy, but there's also a girl, and they have to have this fight because otherwise the king is going to be really unhappy with them, but he might be okay with it if they potentially didn't have the fight, but instead found some money, and you get the picture. It's very, very hard to outline what your story is in a nutshell, making it really difficult for somebody to really get hooked on your book. Another con, timing. Chances are it's going to take you a lot longer to write a book if you are pantsing. Not only could it take you longer to write your story, it will take you longer to finish your story, because your pantsing style may not necessarily have those set goals or key milestones to help keep you on track and make sure that you get to the end of your book. Writer's block. I've mentioned it before. It happens. Sometimes our creative brains are taking a nap. Other days, they're so hyped up on caffeine, they can't keep focused on one thing for more than 20 seconds. Without a plan for what's coming next in your book, it makes it even harder for you to break past that block. A lot of writers who prefer to plot are at least able to plug away at something when they are struggling with writer's block. They know what needs to go in the section, so they just churn out something. It could be rubbish, whatever they're writing, but at least they are writing something. Writer's block is something that all authors and writers come up against. So I think it's something I'm going to do a future video on, because there is so much more that can be said on writer's block. So these are some of the pros and cons to both plotting and pantsing. So if you're thinking, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, I can see why you might feel that way, but that is not the case at all. There are plenty of writers who get on really well as a plotter or as a pantser. And there are also writers who prefer to combine the two methods in some kind of hybrid. That's what I do. So I like to be able to have the freedom to be able to adapt my story and let it develop organically, but I also know that I need to be able to keep myself on target. So there is some element of structure there that I need to make sure that I'm able to complete my writing on time. I also know that I need to keep myself focused and goal orientated, otherwise my writing loses momentum. So while I may come up with a scene in my head that I'm transfixed with and I think it's a really great idea, rather than just launching headlong straight into writing that scene and trying to make a book out of it, try and pull the reins back a little bit, which is hard sometimes, I know, and I take a little time to explore that scene and the potential of that scene further. Okay, so let's take an example. I have a scene in my head and there are these two protagonists, male and female, and they are fighting in an alleyway with an invisible enemy. Great, sounds fun. I love an action scene. But before I start writing it, I need to know a couple of things. What led to this fight? What happens after this fight? Why is this fight so important? Who are these protagonists? What are their goals? Who is the antagonist? What's their beef? All these questions and more I will ask myself to try and determine whether the scene that popped into my head is truly worthy of a whole story, or if it was just a fun imagining. If the answer is no, then maybe I'll put it on the back burner, bear it in mind maybe for a future story. If the answer is yes, then okay, let's start putting some structure in place and seeing if we can take this baby further. So for me, I like to plot out my chapters. So I start with it's just a very small summary, giving me an idea of what needs to happen in that chapter to move the story on. So I'll start with the first chapter, and I know in that chapter that I need to introduce at least one of my main characters, potentially more. It can be the protagonist or the antagonist. It very much depends on the story. So once I've plotted out how I'm meeting them, I know in the next few chapters or next few scenes, I need to introduce my other main characters so we have them all there set up. After that, it's a case of how do these characters meet? What happens? What's the inciting incident? What is the catalyst to drive us forward towards that fight scene that I know so well in my head? I will usually start each chapter by writing a really short summary as to what needs to happen within that chapter. I try and keep it brief because then that gives me some flexibility. And then what I do is I'll then start writing it. If when I'm then writing the chapter, I discover that there's actually some more that needs to be included in here, whether that is to add to the storyline, add a subplot, or possibly just to develop the characters further. So what I can do is I can write down an extra scene, or I can even write an additional chapter and go back and change those summaries that I wrote at the beginning to make sure that they still fit in with the storyline now that I've changed it slightly. And it's perfectly okay to do that. It's okay to change it as you go along, just as long as you check in with what you've written previously and what is to come, so that you know that the story is still going to flow nicely. Perhaps two characters don't have to fall in love and have their first kiss in chapter 3. Perhaps you want to prolong that romance a little bit longer, and that scene, that falling in love and that kiss, doesn't happen until chapter 12, and that's okay, just as long as you make sure that that doesn't stand out from the rest of your storyline and jar your reader as to something that has been put in as an afterthought. The point is, it's okay for me to change my mind as I go along, just as long as I'm realistic and sensible about the tangents on which I go off on. Keeping a structure and a summary of what needs to happen in my story helps keep my tangents in check, stops them getting a little too crazy, and make sure I end up with a story that still works. And for me, it helps me write the damn thing. For far too long, I would pants and I would start with a story, I'd start with an idea in my head and I'd write down that scene, and then something else would come to my mind and I'd have to write down that scene before I lost it. And in the end, I had lots of disjointed scenes and chapters that I needed to somehow meld together, and I found there were a lot of holes in my story, and I decided halfway along I didn't like one of the characters, and so I kind of changed their purpose and where they were going, and that messed up what had happened previously and what I'd spent so long crafting and working on, because I was so caught up in this idea but without any structure. What I have found is that I get huge pride and satisfaction from completing the task, even if it is just writing one chapter rather than finishing the whole book. I know I'm going towards that ultimate goal and I'm gonna get it finished. Once it's finished, it means I can put it out there and my readers can have a go at it and hopefully enjoy it. And that brings me so much more satisfaction than allowing my mind to wander and go crazy with its tangents. Doesn't mean it's never going to happen again, let's be honest. Like I said, 100 different characters milling around in here wanting some attention. I'm not crazy, I promise. So that is all I'm going to go into today on plotting and pantsing and the writing process. There is so much more that could be said on this topic, and there are some things, like I said earlier, like writer's block, that I think I'm going to go and cover on a future video because there is an awful lot to be said on that topic. Equally, if there is something that you would like me to discuss next time, then make sure you write a comment below so I can see what it is you would like me to cover and I can see what I can do for you. Next week, I'm going to be talking about writing 3-dimensional characters and talking about my process to making sure that they come out as realistic individuals who you want to root for or hate, one or the other. So make sure you tune into that next Friday when the next video will be coming out. And before I go, let me just remind you that my debut novel, Saved by the Big Bad Wolf, is available for you to buy on Amazon. The link's in the description below. You can either get it as an ebook or you can get it as a paperback. Bringing me to the competition, yes, it is still running. You have a chance to get your hands on a signed copy of Saved by the Big Bad Wolf, and all you have to do to enter the competition is comment below this video and let me know what your favourite paranormal creature is. That's it, you'll automatically be added into the draw. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care and I will see you next time. Bye.